So it turns out a lot of times when we think about influencing people and making changes in society, we think about making changes in technology or making changes in the product. But another way to change society is to change their psychological perspective, to give them a new way of looking at something while keeping that thing the same. One way that this is illustrated is by the power of stories. So, Rob Walker and Joshua Green, these are two reporters that wanted to demonstrate the power of stories. They went out and they bought 100 useless trinkets that cost just a few dollars each. And for each of these objects, they just recruited writers to write a story behind each one. So, for example, there was this globe paperweight. They bought it for a few bucks, maybe at a garage sale. And they had someone write up a 4-page story that involved this paperweight. It involved romance and relationships and conflicts. It was this whole sort of personal story surrounding this paperweight. And they were able to sell the paperweight along with this story for $198. So the value of this paperweight increased 132,000% as a result of the item having a story behind it. And this is discussed in the book Mean People Suck by Michael Brenner. The notion of stories increasing the value of items is illustrated in art a lot because the physical value of the materials is much less than the value created when those materials are combined in an interesting, thought-provoking way, and the artist's own branding and own story is woven into that along with the appeal and the notion that that piece is displayed at a museum. So all of these factors combine to make what physically might not cost very much turn into something very expensive. This is illustrated by a recent news item of a piece of art that consisted of a banana being duct taped to the wall. This was Maurizio Catalan in the Art Basel Miami Beach Museum. And this is already something that we already talk about, is like this notion that why is art worth what it is? It's probably one of the strongest examples of the power of telling a story in terms of changing the value of something. But David DeTuna came along and he took the banana from the duct tape and he ate it. And that, really just goes to the extreme of saying, how much is this really worth if somebody can eat it and if it could potentially be replaced in 15 seconds by buying another banana? The notion of story and branding and people's personal attachment to something, the value that has over the technology and the infrastructure, is really illustrated by Coke and the story that they would rather lose their employees and their buildings and their equipment than lose their brand. So if they could maintain the branding, the psychology behind Coke, the name, the colors, then they wouldn't be Coke anymore, and they would struggle much more than if they lost their employees and their buildings and their equipment. So for example, if they were to maintain all of their infrastructure, but they were no longer allowed to use the Coke name and to use the Coke branding and the color and all those aspects, then they would struggle more than if they had to lose the psychological perspective that people have of that brand. They would be able to rebuild based on that psychological perspective. And that's the power of psychology. So Rory Sutherland, in his new book, Alchemy, he goes to great lengths to talk about the power of changing psychological perspective and the notion that just these really small changes can influence our happiness and have very big impacts that have minimal costs. So the one example he gives in a talk, which I'll put a link to below, is in Stockholm, Sweden, there's a hotel that has one set of lift buttons with the rooms of the hotel. There's the garage, first, second, third floor, and so on. And another set of lift buttons with rock and roll, country, jazz, all the different types of music that you can listen to while you're on the elevator, right? This is something that's different and that you don't expect. You're not used to being able to choose your own elevator music. And so the simple addition of this extra row of buttons gets people talking about it, and it differentiates that hotel from the other hotels. It works far more than a lot of other sort of technological, fancy innovations that you could have done that would be much more costly. Another simple change which he discusses is adding the member since information to a credit card, just showing that you're a loyal customer to that credit card. right? This has no influence on the use of the credit card. Most people don't see it. Most cashiers don't even see it. But people really care about that, and they like feeling that they're loyal. So adding this little piece of information can have a big impact. Based on this notion, there was the interesting campaign from Ogilvy called the hashtag FCKHIV campaign, where they simply changed the finger that people get tested on HIV. This notion that just changing the finger that people get tested for HIV can have an impact on the amount of people who end up going and getting tested. The whole notion was that typically you get tested on your index finger, and they encourage people to get tested on their middle finger. And the notion is that getting tested on your middle finger is sending a message to HIV. And that generated strong social media support, blew up on social media, and it got a lot more people to come out and get tested. Another example from Alchemy comes from where they tried to reduce crime within an area, and they placed steel shutters around the buildings at night to discourage theft. And so you can imagine a lot of solutions to reduce crime. You could create CCTV cameras, you could increase police presence, but Tara Austin came up with this interesting idea simply to paint the faces of babies and toddlers onto these steel shutters. And this was based on the insight that people are attracted to these Disney characters with really large eyes. Basically, these sort of infantile characteristics, if they're exaggerated within these cartoon characters, they have this sort of calming, positive effect on people. So simply printing faces of babies and toddlers on the shutters has this impact that ends up reducing crime, and it's at little cost. So these are just all examples of how small changes can lead to big effects because it's understanding human psychology. So changing people's psychological perspective can often have a big impact on the way they behave compared to focusing on technological changes, which are often more costly. So thanks for checking out this video. We're posting regularly on our YouTube page here about our psychological ideas and how humans influence each other and are engaged by media. So hit the subscribe and the bell button if you'd like to be in on that. Hit the share if you share and the like if you like. Be sure to let us know in the comments below what you think about this video or any topics you'd like to discuss. So thanks for checking this out.